What if your labor shortage isn't really a hiring problem? When workers are scarce, raising wages, adding bonuses, and hiring earlier may only move the problem around. Today, supply chain leaders Will O'Brien and Dave DuBose reveal how organizations can redesign the work, become employers people don't want to leave, and stop treating a systemic problem like an annual emergency. When the environment changes, working harder inside the old system isn't enough. The Innovative Leadership Institute helps organizations rethink the systems, structures, and leadership practices holding them back and turn complex challenges into lasting transformation. Learn more at innovativeleadership.com. For now, let's move on to today's episode.
Today we're going to talk about lasting solutions for labor shortages, and our guests are Will O'Brien and Dave DuBose. Will's a partner at True North Growth Partners, where he works with organizations on supply chain and operations side of their businesses. As an executive at Lowe's Home Improvement, he helped to lead development of the supply chain for the big box retailer during a period of rapid growth. Dave DuBose is a senior supply chain professional with more than 30 years of professional experience. So between the three of us, we have 90 years of experience. Let us hope we're smart.
Or more.
Yeah. So let's start with the labor shortage for DC centers. How significant is the labor shortage, and how many people work in a typical DC?
It's very significant. Columbus, where we are today, is at about 3% unemployment, and I think functional full employment is between 4 and 5%. Mm-hmm. If you look at some government numbers, there are over 700,000 jobs that are open, in excess of applicants for those jobs.
So what happens if I run an organization and we just don't have enough people? Do I not ship stuff? Do people work longer hours? What do we do?
Yes, and to some extent, you're a little too late, but that doesn't keep an organization from scrambling. So They're going to be working on wage increases. They're going to be working on giving bonuses to stay or to sign on. Mm-hmm. There's going to be overtime, and that's where the leadership is really stressed in terms of how good of leaders they are, because a lot of times that ends up being taken out on the people.
I remember working for a client, and it was the hourly workers in a manufacturing facility, and they had issues of people sneaking out of their shifts to pick up their kids from daycare. Things like that, because they had compulsory overtime, and you're choosing between your job and your kids.
Correct.
And those are pretty untenable choices.
So the earth is shaking when that happens, and there are a lot of retailers that lose sales.
We're in Columbus, so we'll just cite the statistic about 3% unemployment. So we're in a tight situation. If you live here, you realize this is a distribution hub, one of the great distribution hubs for the United States. In particular, we have a number of different industries, but in particular, we have a lot of retail here. Specialty retail in particular tends to have a severe spike at holiday, something like 3 or 4x to 1. In fact, my old employer, one of the sayings was a day is a week and a week is a month. So when you're talking about the volume compression that hits, the wave rather that hits, starting around Thanksgiving, it actually starts more like November 1st now, and it extends through, January. And the companies that are out there are very, very well aware of this. They're all competing for the same resources. We'll talk some more about that. But they basically have a plan to go out and just acquire those temporary and seasonal resources because they know they're going to have this enormous spike.
Distribution is a global issue because the components used to manufacture everything we use come from around the world.
Absolutely.
Your shirt probably has buttons from one country, thread from another country, fabric from a third country, and they may actually stitch it someplace else.
Correct. And China is becoming more expensive even as a manufacturing point because there's so much demand coming out of there, getting a middle class. They're becoming more expensive. As China gets more expensive, a lot of that production starts moving to Indonesia and other markets.
If you look at the overall supply chain, it is very integrated. It is definitely global, and there's definitely a ripple effect that goes all the way around the world.
Okay.
We used to consider where we're going to put the next distribution center for a number of reasons, balancing transportation costs, but we'd always look at labor market as well. You could be 25 or 30 miles away and nominally be neutral overall cost-wise, so you look at the relative labor markets. And you used to know some markets were good labor markets than others. There's not a good labor market anymore.
Specifically in the U.S.?
in the U.S.
Okay. And
Correct.
I'm assuming there are other entire countries that have similar dynamics.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I talked to one executive and he said, Will, I spent my whole career in this market that he was in. He said, I never had trouble getting employees. Last year I had trouble, and this year I'm having worse. And that was actually, it's about 2 years ago that we had this conversation, and it's just gotten worse each year since then. It's a challenge kind of across the board.
What happens to DC operators when there aren't enough workers to fill the open roles?
So think about it. I'm in a situation where I need to get 300 to 400 people to fulfill my peak season. If I blow fourth quarter, which is the peak season, I'll blow the financials for the whole year. That's a lot of corporate pressure coming down on you. I'm going to pay whatever I have to pay to get the people in here. And to the extent that I fail at that, I risk losing a lot of sales. And there are no shortage of retailers that have gone out of business because Christmas didn't show up. And part of that is because they couldn't fulfill.
And
Right.
if I have to pay whatever it costs, that eats into my margin.
Now I'm selling unprofitably, right? I'm also reducing the standards that I hire by. So I'm pulling people in. They can't pass my drug test. Who's got the backbone to stand up under that pressure I described and to say, no, I'm not going to hire this person when this person's willing to unload a truck for me? I talked to an operator and he said, Will, I hired 12 forklift operators. A week later, I only had 3.
Now, those guys you want to be sober.
Yes,
Most definitely.
That's machinery.
And there is some skills necessary because you're putting things up 20-something feet in the air, a very heavy pallet of product, right? So there's some skill to it. And
Okay.
he's having such trouble. He only kept 3 a week later. I don't know what happened in weeks 2 or 3, how many of those 3 he kept, but I had to hire 12 to have 3 a week later. And I thought that was terrible. And I thought maybe that's just specific to him. And I talked to somebody in a whole other part of the country, and his answer was, yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. We're laughing a little bit because some of it is a little bit funny, but you do have to really think about and contemplate these issues and do it in a very planful way. And it's difficult. There's a danger of getting into, I'll call it the fire of peak season. We'll hit on this probably a time or two, but your options are expensive and few at that point in time. But you still have to do something because, to Will's point, you don't want to risk missing holiday and going out of business. It's a tough problem.
So now year 2 and 3, a lot of folks they'll say, yeah, we're going to be ready because I've already prepared the organization to increase wages in September. Again, the other 6 buildings that you're competing with are increasing their wages in September too. And I bet you Amazon will increase them more.
I wonder about people moving from one industry to the next. So say I've got a robust construction industry in the summer and I need people to work in my DC in the winter. Is there a transition between labor fields where I can draw from people who are directing traffic during road work and they work in a DC in the winter?
Yeah. And there's jobs that lend themselves to just about anybody can show up because unloading a truck is moving a box. And so there's other jobs that you're interacting with the screen and you have to be able to take instruction. You have to work at a certain pace. Right.
Yeah, you have to be literate.
Right.
And we still have people who
Correct.
aren't.
Or you can design your systems for that. And that's a whole nother topic is there are people with mental and other challenges that you can design a lot of interfaces for that enable them to work from graphical images. Another subject, but it's a great workforce.
Expand your employee pool too, frankly.
And it's great for our communities.
100%.
Talk about stickiness. That's one of the things, because when you give them that, you give them some independence, you give them some well-being that they never thought, or their parents never thought that they would have. Walgreens is a pioneer of that. And a lot of them, it's about screening them into the right job so they can work at productivity levels well beyond what your typical productivity levels are.
I understand we're not limiting it to just DCs, but maybe the broader supply chain.
Yeah, we've been using the term distribution, which is, I think, a very accurate term. I would broaden it probably a little bit more to logistics. So we're talking about physical movement of product, and we're focusing heavily on the distribution center and what happens in the distribution center. Some people call it a warehouse, but really it is probably a little bit broader than that because you've got needs that are outside of that, up and down the supply chain. The DC and the logistics within the DC, I think, are really kind of the critical element here, because you run into a problem with just being able to get enough qualified people and keep them and retain them.
And it happens to manufacturers as well. So it's manufacturing. Last week, my wife took a picture in the grocery store and sent it to me because she was appalled that there was a huge display of candy for Halloween. This was middle of July. with Halloween displays already out in the stores. So think about why that happens, because what happens in the store in October has to happen in the distribution centers 6 to 8 weeks ahead of that, and happens at manufacturing 6 to 8 weeks ahead of that. So your Halloween candy's already been produced. So it's just time phased, but they're all facing it. And if it's employee intensive business, same fundamental.
You mentioned manufacturing, and things do get produced. There's a lead time. China, or more broadly Asia, is really the world's factory, right? Gets made over there, gets shipped over in containers on ships. That stuff's got to have some place to go. It comes into the Port of Long Beach or wherever. It gets into various distribution centers across the U.S., but you could expand that globally. And they're going to get full, and they're going to ship out to stores. So you got your Halloween candy early, dynamic, or
bathing suits
in February kind of thing. And you could say the same thing about online, where the DC is your store basically, but it's got to have a place to go. They can't just sit there. It's got to move. And with lead times being what they are and manufacturing cycles being what they are, that's what you end up with.
Supply chain, the job, I think, is to make it as efficient as possible and take all the cost out, which then leads us to which part do you optimize?
You optimize the whole thing. That's what makes it a tough problem, and that's basically that's our lot in life, right? I mean, that's what we do, and it's a tough thing, and it's a tough equation. There's just a lot of variables. Snowstorms happen. You've got an economic downturn. You got environmental factors. You got disasters. You got whatever. There's a lot of things to factor in.
So, what are some DCs doing to solve the problem? What have you seen that's worked?
Well, before I hit what's worked, let me tell you what tends to be what really happens, right? So you've probably heard the analogy of Wayne Gretzky didn't skate to the puck, he skated to where the puck is going to be.
Right.
A lot of distribution and manufacturing operators, I would say, are skating to the puck in terms of, okay, they got their fingers burnt last year, so I'm going to hire earlier this year, and I'm going to set my organization up that we're going to have higher wage increases, and I'm going to have retention bonuses for people that stay past December 25th.
All for Black Friday, or there is no Black Friday anymore. It's all the sales start.
It's more of what I like to call, gray November. Sort of a gray November is what.
If you're the only operator taking those actions, you'd be out of the game. But when all the people that you're competing with to hire 300 or 400 people for peak, when they're all doing that, it just moves the problem around a little bit, but doesn't really solve it. So we distinguish between health and wellness and emergency care.
Okay.
If I'm being pinched right now for employees next week, next month, or this peak, and the peak is coming on you, it may be too late, and your options are fewer and they're more expensive. So you're probably going to come to the point where you're going to use a lot of temp agencies. You're going to be paying a lot of money, whether it's retention bonuses or wage increases or meeting what Amazon's going to pay or whatever it's going to be. They're going to have some level of effectiveness, but you can survive. But I think you need to aspire for more than survival.
What else can I do?
If you need help on an emergency situation, that's one type of medicine. We're talking about skating to where the puck is. We think that there's kind of three fundamental things that somebody can work on, and I call this more on the health and wellness path, so that you can be prosperous in the long term and you can have a loyal workforce that you get a lot out of, and you can control your destiny that way. I kind of group them into things that reduce the work content of the DC. So how can I support the demand that I have and do it in a way that reduces the number of people? And we're going to talk about equipment, material handling equipment. We're going to talk about robotics. We're going to talk about a few things there. The other kind of group of things that I would suggest is be a sticky employer. There are things that an organization can do for its people if it really seeks to understand them, just like they sell to their customers, sell to your workforce, and put together a relationship if you designed it so that somebody would be crazy to ever want to leave you. And then lastly is get the most out of your people. Some of that is software technology, but a lot of that is just plain leadership.
Some of this isn't surprising. It's running your business well and being proactive.
Correct. Being a good leader.
It's important to really start very, very intentionally with a focus that is months ahead of things, right?
Okay.
So, if you get kind of smacked in the face and say, I've got to just start hiring a whole bunch of people, holy cannoli, this is going to be a problem. that is a way of dealing with it. It's not a particularly effective one. Really, what's
This is what we call poor leadership.
This is called poor leadership.
Reactive leadership.
Yeah. Really what you want to do is bake this into your overall strategy. HR, as well as your logistics and distribution leadership, got to play critical roles in doing this, because you got to really think about your workforce. What it is you're trying to do. You've got to think about your plan for inventory, and everybody has this as time goes on. And then what is it really going to take just mathematically to meet that? And then I've got to think about what are my options and really just get out ahead of it. I mean, so a lot of it is just being very planful and thoughtful and executing well.
Conceptually, these are not new ideas. The tactics you're using may be very different given the change in the ecosystem, that now I go to my friend Jeff Bezos every time I want to buy something and Lowe's doesn't have it,
Right.
or my local pet food store doesn't have it.
Two avenues of newness to hit at what you're asking about. Number one is technologies available today. The other is orchestrating a more complex, a more comprehensive view towards how do I give care and feeding to my people so my people never want to leave.
And in a time of less than full employment, my people didn't want to leave
Even
at
more
the
important.
rate
Right.
that they're leaving now.
Right.
At this point, you said 3% here.
Yeah.
That's lower than structural unemployment.
Sure.
I've got to pull people out of the air
Right.
and hoping they can pass a drug test.
Yeah, basically.
But is have a playbook, put the right plays in it, and execute the heck out of those plays.
So it is a combination of things, right? There are some sort of tried and true, this is not exactly rocket science, just good leadership, good planning, good strategy and execution. There's that piece of it. The way you do it, there's some secret sauce to that.
Right.
But yes, there's that. And then the other piece is, to Will's point, is there is technology that is available today, thank goodness, that does provide different options than we had 10, 20 years ago, certainly.
I talked to someone from P&G yesterday, and he was talking about the way they've blown up parts of their business, and one is supply chain. And the use of technology has completely upended how they think about, yet they still manufacture things overseas. They still come over in boats. Then they put them on trains. So some things remain constant.
In a very simple model, you can think of it as sort of the plan, make, move, sell, deliver, return. And that's a very linear set of processes, right? The change with today's world is those really have to happen pretty much in a very overlapping, if not parallel manner, to be able to be effective and to work in this kind of high clock speed environment that we live in, where if I don't have it in an hour, oh my God, what am I going to do? Yeah, exactly.
An example of where fundamentally it's the same, but you get under the details is different. It's not unusual at all for an organization to have one fulfillment center in the United States, give it to FedEx, UPS, whomever, and get it out to everybody in the country. And it comes at a certain cost and a certain speed. Now, Amazon's setting expectations for speed and fulfillment. They're putting fulfillment centers virtually in every metropolitan area. They're getting increasingly close to the customers. So if I'm a brick and mortar retailer, what's my play? My play might be use my stores as fulfillment centers. Doesn't mean every store in my chain, but if I have a store in St. Louis, does that make sense for fulfilling St. Louis online demand? Right? And we'll talk about some of these things, but fundamentally, it's just fulfillment. It's just picking an item, giving it to the postman and sending it to Mrs. Smith. But it can be done very, very differently.
Well, in places like your former employer, Lowe's, which is my most frequent shopping experience, I can now go online, click stuff, and go pick it up at the front door.
Right.
Things like that.
Right.
Now, I personally actually happen to like walking around Lowe's, but that does increase my spend.
Correct.
And so what do you suggest has to happen for an organization to effectively deal with the labor shortage in the long term, not scurrying about every year and panicking?
We think about three things: reducing the labor content in a DC. In fact, let's talk about that now. Reducing the labor content. There can be uses of automation, traditional material handling equipment, and robots. 70% of a worker's time is spent walking. It's not unusual to find someone called a picker, someone that goes down the aisles and picks the unit or picks the case, to walk 13, even 15 miles a day. So that's a place where some automation is happening as somebody is walking. We can have something that we'll talk about in a minute called AMRs or AGVs, or the type of robots that will take that goods to person. There are scenarios, particularly if it's at peak, depending on who your customer or your destination is. Maybe you analyze the product flows, which is a very analytical exercise that we do all the time. and understand this vendor or this product group would be smart to just skip the DC altogether and go direct to customer, or skip the DC altogether and go direct to store, because the store, when it's changing season, has its greatest need for inventory of that items if it's a seasonal type of a thing. There's ways to do a DC bypass. Another thing is, and a lot of folks are doing this, there are certain items that they want to show online that they don't carry in the store or in the DC. They're slower. Size 14 shoe might get passed to Under Armour or Nike or Adidas or whomever to be fulfilled, right? Because they don't sell so much, or a strange color of a shirt. So that's kind of a norm. But again, if you're preparing for the peak and you need to carve off some of that demand, maybe you can do analysis that would look at product categories or vendors, and you have to compare, is that vendor capable and what's their cost of doing that? But there's some demand that you can just carve off and not have that product flow through the DC.
And that's the value of working with someone like you who's had that experience and go in with already a reasonable point of view.
It's a hypothesis and a lot of data analysis of items, of orders.
I used to work with a guy who called it, you're trying to solve the pig through the python, which is sort of not a great image, I know. But basically, you've got this slug of inventory products that are coming in, all different kinds of items, and is huge. And are there ways that you can take pressure off of your system by just avoiding the DC altogether? That's great if you can. It balances your, what we call the logistics network, and it also takes pressure off the labor situation.
Those can be permanent flows, or they can just be flows during peak season or transition periods of a season. Another is store-based fulfillment, using stores for fulfillment. And that took a while to come and is starting to become more common. Not everybody is willing to do it. Some folks are completely averse to the potential that a customer that's walked into the store won't be served properly. Others say, we just don't have back rooms large enough to do this, right?
So that means my grocery store, I can go pick it up at the curb.
Perfectly good example. A couple flavors here are BOPIS, is an acronym for buy online, pick up in store.
Okay.
And it's exactly what you described.
Because I know I want X numbers of apples and whatever, and I don't necessarily need them to come from Amazon.
Correct.
I'm driving home from work anyway.
Give them your number, they put it in your truck, then to have it sitting on your doorstep.
Instead of a distribution center employee doing that, you've got somebody in the store who's doing this. You just shifted that labor to another resource that may be hopefully less stressed at the time, less tax in terms of workload on that individual. That's basically what you're doing. You're just shifting it.
It's another thing that Amazon has driven. So historically, you would hear supply chain professionals say, you're going to pay way too much in fulfillment costs because you fulfilled it at the DC and at the store, and the world is going to come to an end if you try to do something like that. Your inventory is going to go way up because of the square root of N, which is a technical inventory management term. The reality is Amazon is pushing the competitive for speed, for quality, and for local, which has changed the environment, which makes some answers that I might not do in the past, I'm willing to do. Number two, if you really analyze transportation and freight and handling, and if you take a nice sliver of items that you're willing to do that for, it's not necessarily at a cost disadvantage. In fact, that last mile, that putting something in UPS or FedEx from Memphis to San Diego can be pretty expensive. Or I could have it go on a full truckload or an LTL in my most economic mode to my store, my remote store. And that transportation is now much more economical, and I just have to do a local courier. So you got to net all those things out. That's that analysis that we were talking about.
Or you're shifting it to me, the customer, to go pick it up for the last mile.
Pick it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, again, distribution centers are built all around efficiency and being very, very efficient. So that conventional wisdom was, well, gee, you always want to do it at the distribution center. But with labor and with the impact of peak season and all the things that have happened, okay, maybe it makes sense to still do it at the distribution center, or maybe it makes sense for you, the consumer, to do it, or somebody to do it in the store, because what didn't seem to make sense before may make a lot of sense now. Just because, would you rather miss the sale? No, of course not.
You can't miss, that's a cardinal sin, right?
Well, and we as consumers have now changed our expectations as well.
Absolutely.
I love that I can go search online, find the most efficient thing, and then see if it's in the store. Instead of driving around town for my multiple trips a day, I'm online for 5 minutes.
It's a very common consumer behavior that's happening. I had an executive from DSW speak on a panel that I was moderating at a conference once, and he said, we are 20 minutes away from 70% of our customers.
20 minutes away from 70% of our customers.
Right. If you look at our stores, we can't afford to not use our stores for that type of fulfillment.
Well, and we're paying for the stores, and we're paying for the employees to show up in the stores.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
20 minutes away. So what's the Amazon effect? I'll get it to you fast. I can get it to you economically. I'm going to use those stores. They don't even have to use all of their stores. Let's just use St. Louis as our example. They can understand the store volume and have inventory there for the stores. The online demand, back to that size 14 shoe, they will ship in those items that they can forecast are going to sell in the St. Louis market. They'll try to get it to the right store. But if they don't, the person is told, don't go to Northland, go to Southland. But they won't do that, say, with a size 14 shoe because that doesn't have anywhere near enough demand. Right. So they're doing some pretty innovative work there.
So you're telling me about now how I manage the content of the facility. You've also talked about other tactics like being a sticky employer. What exactly does that look like?
Being a sticky employer is putting those things in place that are going to be very hard for somebody else to replicate. So some of the things that are not hard to replicate is making sure that you're paying a competitive wage. And we're not saying that retention or sign-on bonuses are wrong. Just make sure that they fit in the portfolio in the right way. For some people in this strata of employees, some of them value 401k, paying for education, career progression. Some of them that's not significant for, or insurance. Some spouses provide the insurance, so it's not important to this person. So that is kind of assumed. But there's some other things that aren't so easy to replicate. A couple of those are, think about food service. What do they come in to eat? Sometimes they have to brown bag it. Sometimes it's just a vending machine. Sometimes it's the same old food that's always there. And some cafeterias are really pretty good. And sometimes they're subsidized and healthy, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes they're subsidized. So back to understand what your workforce would value, and what you can pull off. If you haven't built a building, you have a lot more latitude on a cafeteria.
So if I run a facility that's focused on fitness, I'm probably going to provide healthy food over a kegerator.
Correct. Patagonia does daycare, and that's a really hard thing to replicate. They do it in their DC as well as in their corporate environment. So they have found a 25% reduction in turnover for people who participate in childcare.
Wow.
That's significant.
That's better than the $2 raise.
Correct.
Probably way less expensive for me as the provider.
The convenience of I take my child to the same place I go to work. The convenience of if a fever is run, I don't have to get in my car and drive somewhere. I can just go over. Some people will say, well, how do you pay for it? So Patagonia did a pretty good job of analyzing how you pay for it. And they have offset about 91%, which is a pretty precise number, right? So let's just say 90% of the costs have been offset. About half of it just comes from tax benefits. There's some tax credits they're eligible for, and 35% of costs incurred in a qualified program can be taken off of their taxes. Right? That's part of the retention issue. They get skilled up, they get very productive, and then they're gone, and I got to get somebody else.
Now I've got to hire somebody else. I've got lost time, lost productivity, and then the training time and expense.
You got a learning curve, and exactly, they're not as efficient as that person who just walked out your door.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other is just associate engagement was where they gave about 10% of the benefit from offsetting this.
So the other thing you talked about was employing people with varying kinds of what we would, I guess, consider disabilities or different strengths.
Physical or cognitive challenges, right? And we put the program in at Lowe's Home Improvement as well. And it becomes a matter of there's some local agencies that will help with this in the job training. And it's a mindset of screening people in, not screening people out. And it is absolutely a change the life for somebody business. There's examples where they might not take in information by reading. So, okay, the station you're at is the Jet. So the screen has a Jet and they go, and I know I'm going to work at Jet today. I'm going to receive product. And they may receive product all day long. Receiving product is looking at it, it's got integrity, okay, and I put this label on it and I pass it on. And they'll do that over and over and over again, is what they do. And you can give the instructions through a GUI, graphical user interface, and you just learn, there is a training involved to get them there, but they are a very loyal, very productive. And I know the people that are real innovators on here said there's no freebies in this. They don't get a lower wage. They don't get lower expectations. They don't get anything like that. They are competing for work more effectively than most people in the building because they become very productive at what they do. A great workforce.
It's a positive thing, absolutely.
We've talked about facing labor shortages. You've talked about the three main solutions. to get more out of the work, and that has to do with the content in the facilities, being a sticky employer, getting the most from your workforce. What did I miss?
I think just in terms of getting the most from your workforce, there are some great new tools out there in the realm of automated material handling equipment, robots, fancy stuff like that, frankly. Also IT kinds of tools that use artificial intelligence to help manage your labor standards and really just make you much more efficient and supports what I'll call the human workforce a better way.
And there are some partners that Upshift is a partner that you can have, which enables you to tap into a completely different temporary workforce, kind of like Uber, keeps you from having to use a cab. You have a completely different driver that's monetizing the times of their week or their day when they wouldn't normally be able to make money. They give examples of having executives and lawyers going in and working in effectively a blue collar type job because that's the way he's going to pay for his golf without taking out of the family budget. There's a lot of women that have kids, and there's a period that their schedule just doesn't make them particularly employable for a conventional. But Upshift is kind of like Uber, where the employer posts what they need. I need somebody on Tuesday at 3, and I can say, okay, I'll take that. And you go in there. It's a great deal that's growing rapidly.
So for our listeners, if you're facing labor shortages, a lot of this will translate to the broader environment. Will and Dave, how would our listeners get in touch with you, either learn more about you and what you're doing, or ask you questions?
Well, we're both part of a firm called True North Growth Partners, and our website is truenorthgrowthpartners.com.
Definitely contact us that way.
Okay. They can connect with you on LinkedIn, I'm assuming.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great.
We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much for joining us today, and please join us again in the near future.